We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The Supreme Court has ruled against the EPA in being able to determine its own regulations and powers. The bigger picture being that federal agencies may be about to face their own bonfire of the vanities. And if that's not a cause for liberty, what else is? Well, we're joined by Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire, host of the excellent Uprising and Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, to help sort it all through. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark. On Justice Breyer's last week in the court.
Absolutely, yeah. It's leaving on a low note. So, Scott, give us a brief overview of what happened at the Supreme Court.
Are you speaking specifically about the EPA case?
About the EPA case.
All right, because there's been a lot going on. So,
we will get to that, I guarantee it.
Yeah. So the EPA case was about the Obama-era EPA promulgating or putting forth new regulations pursuant to the Clean Air Act, where basically they were going to regulate and regulate with the intent to eliminate, these coal-fired electricity plants. Well, the state of West Virginia, where a lot of coal comes from, a lot of high-quality coal comes from, they sued, and they said the EPA never had the power to do this. They're regulating all this stuff, which their grant of authority doesn't include, and they sued. And the court examined the case, and there were two questions that were basically important for court watchers. Number one, did the state of West Virginia have the right to sue? Because all the EPA regulations weren't formalized. So the question was then, whether or not they had the right to sue, or did they have to wait to sue? And the court said they could sue because they were damaged by what the agency had already done.
Okay.
The economic damages were, big and potentially going to be severe. The second question then was the EPA okay? Did they follow the law in putting forth those regulations? And sort of with the way things have been trending with the court, with these kind of conservative wish list cases, if you will, coming through, the reversal of Roe, the granting of gun carry rights, there was, a hope that there would be a very firm rule tamping down agency rulemaking power by the court. I think we have a sort of a middle ground where the court did tamp down agency rulemaking power, but we got a Chief Justice Roberts opinion on it rather than, a Justice Gorsuch or a Justice Thomas opinion on it. So immediately upon reading who the name of the author was, that sort of tells you a little bit about, how that rule is going to come down.
Okay, so why is this such a big deal, though? Does it implicate other federal agencies like the ATF, for example, or the BATF, as you prefer to call it, just because it's a lot less cool?
Yes, well, it does implicate it, and exactly how we're going to have to wait and see. But this is not the slam dunk, libertarian / conservative victory for limited rulemaking on agency powers. It is a limiting decision. I think it's a win for the conservatives. It's to be sure, but it's not the sort of slam dunk that the Roe case was, or the New York State Rifle and Pistol v. Bruin case was, I think.
So essentially, does the ruling mean that any potentially damaging regulations that the EPA decides for itself now can't be decided for itself and have to be applied for and set by Congress? Is that the crux of it?
It depends on the rule that the EPA is promulgating and what the authorizing legislation is for that rule. If the authorizing legislation is regulate X, Y, and Z, then they can regulate X, Y, and Z. But if the rulemaking doesn't specify that it can rule against things that affect X, Y, and Z, that's where we now have a little bit more power on the anti-regulation side.
Now, I know you hate to speculate, unless, of course, it's in Bitcoin. But what kind of challenges might we see come about because of this ruling? Now, for me, the ATF's a big one that seems to be overbearing in its use of regulatory authority. So what kind of cases might we see coming for other federal agencies?
Mark, on the one side, we have infinity, and on the other side, we have 21 million Bitcoin. That's not speculation. It's just a time game, all right?
Okay.
Well, I think that there has been a lot of kind of talk on the internet.com, if you will, about how this will affect, you mentioned ATF regulations, both with respect to bump stocks and shoulder braces. Those are things that that might be impacted. And You know, here's where this is not speculation. The people on the other side of those regulations, whatever regulations are promulgated by the ATF, they will sue. And now that suit will have to be passed through the lens of this case. So previous to now, there would be other cases that both the district court and the appellate courts, presumably if it gets there, would have to look at to see whether or not the ATF rulemaking, is kosher or not. Now this will be the case. EPA v. West Virginia will be the case that decides whether or not, this is an okay thing. And it'll be a very specific reading of the granting language for the ATF's authority, and then the language of the regulation itself, and an examination of what it impacts. So all those things go into the mix to come out, the other end to see what will be allowed. Now, I'll just say, I favor lesser regulations rather than more in almost all areas, and certainly in the area of firearm regulation. And I would prefer it if they would have fewer regulations, but I can't say with confidence that this ruling will mean that it is. I would say that we're better off than we were. The people who favor fewer regulations, we're better off today than we were yesterday. But also, it's a little bit of a disappointment that the court didn't go further.
Okay, so do we expect a particularly large swath of lawfare to be taking place over the next 6 months or so? A full employment act for lawyers, as you might point out.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly. Anytime the Supreme Court announces a standard, particularly a new standard, then so much of what has come before may now be measured up to that standard. And if you think about the cost of these things, the cost to hire a lawyer for an individual person, to go and sue over a Supreme Court case is it exceeds probably anybody's grasp, really. But for an industry or a large company, it's a pittance compared to the cost of meeting some of these regulations. So yes is the answer to your question. I expect to see the courts stacked and packed full of cases regarding this and some of their other decisions.
Now, Scott, I was hugely entertained by one of the first reactions I saw to this Supreme Court opinion. It was from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. And she wrote on Twitter almost immediately, and I quote, "Catastrophic. A filibuster carve-out is not enough. We need to reform or do away with the whole thing for the sake of the planet." End quote. Now, I presume do away with the whole thing. She's talking about the Supreme Court. But is this the worst political take that we're likely to hear?
Yes, because it's from a sitting member of Congress, by the way, who is
Yes.
part of the whole system, doesn't offer any kind of a, actual plan going forward and how to organize. In other words, it's not even meant to be taken seriously. And if it wasn't by the beautiful Boricua from New York, I don't think we would.
Yeah, it just strikes me as strange. She doesn't seem to realize that doing away with the court, well, maybe perhaps the supporters don't realize that doing away with the court would mean that the only branches of government left are Congress and the executive, and then there's nobody to
require. Yeah, I mean, it's not even worth us really. I mean, it's preposterous to talk about. It's not even meant to be taken seriously. Think of what would be required: a constitutional amendment, removing the Supreme Court, and what would be in its place, and how would our nation govern it? I mean, it's silly. It's just silly.
She needs to be forcibly made to watch Jack Black's School of Rock, which I believe outlined the three branches of government rather well. Now, Scott,
she needs to have like a Twitter, like somebody come and slap the phone out of her hand as she's about to tweet in this kind of a state, because it's just not good.
That doesn't happen until you're a Republican president, Scott. I'm sure you know that. Now,
Yeah.
This has been quite the season for the Supreme Court. As you mentioned, Justice Stephen Breyer has retired. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is now a sitting member of the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas waited 30 years to make his groove public. What are some of the highlights and the lowlights of this epic Supreme Court season?
Well, it's the cases, Mark. It's the reversal of Roe v. Wade and the institution of respect and incorporation of the Second Amendment rights of the people against the states. It's that the scared Puerto Rican single mother of three in a bad neighborhood in New York City can actually get a license to carry a gun to protect herself. We know that the civil authorities are not doing the protecting. Crime is off the charts, and it's really the I mean, what's going on with the reversal of Roe v. Wade in and of itself is worthy of more time, than we have time for in a full hour of radio to discuss the implications that it will have politically and also just in every other measure in society. We're entering a new era.
Scott D. Cosenza, a happy Independence Day too, and cheers to the new era.
God save the Queen.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, and Scott D. Cosenza. And of course, my thanks and best wishes go out to you, the listeners, on this 4th of July weekend. I'd like to leave you with my final thoughts for this week's show. Although it may seem that rights and freedoms have become fleeting or endangered things, know that this usurpation of the liberty that we hold dear is merely a temporary thing. Yes, as President Ronald Reagan once said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And he was and is correct. But take heart at the words of Voltaire, who said that injustice, in the end, produces independence. Happy Independence Weekend to you. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fighting for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I can
others.
do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a real big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.